What if I told you there's a tax in America that almost nobody pays? A tax with a 40% rate on paper that has generated less than 1% of federal revenue for most of its existence. A tax that billionaires love to hate publicly while quietly thanking their lawyers for making sure they'll never actually owe it. It's called the estate tax. And the wild thing? It's not broken. It's working exactly as designed, just not for the reason you think. Here's what nobody tells you at the beginning of this conversation. The estate tax was never really about collecting money. It was about fear. Fear of what happens to a democracy when the same 5 families control more wealth than the bottom 150 million citizens combined. Fear that America, the country literally founded on escaping inherited power, was quietly building its own royalty. And that fear? It's as old as the Republic itself. But here's the twist that rewrites everything you think you know about this story. The people who designed the estate tax and the people who hate the estate tax actually agree on more than they'd ever admit. Both sides believe it isn't working. They just disagree on why. So let's go somewhere most videos on this topic never go. Let's ask the question underneath the question. Who was the estate tax actually built to stop? Picture this. The United States government is broke. Not struggling, broke. The gold reserves are nearly gone. Banks are collapsing. Unemployment is skyrocketing. And one man, a private banker, steps in and personally saves the country. His name is J.P. Morgan. And when Morgan bails out the U.S. Treasury like a friend lending cab fare, something changes in the American psyche. Because that moment makes one thing undeniable. This man is more powerful than the government, and he knows it. Morgan wasn't alone. In the 1890s, a tiny cluster of men, Rockefeller in oil, Carnegie in steel, Vanderbilt in railroads, had accumulated fortunes so vast, so structurally embedded in the economy, that the government couldn't touch them without consequences. Rockefeller's Standard Oil controlled 90% of American refining. Carnegie's workers labored 12-hour days, 6 days a week, for wages that barely covered rent in the tenements they were crammed into. And when those workers dared to strike in 1892, Carnegie sent in 300 armed Pinkerton agents. 10 people died. The government restored order, meaning crushed the workers. Here's what this moment reveals that most people miss. The Gilded Age wasn't just about money. It was about who gets to make the rules. And the answer, increasingly, was whoever owns the most. Now, here's where history gets uncomfortable. The man who finally fought back against this system wasn't a socialist, wasn't a union leader, wasn't some revolutionary. He was a trust fund Republican from Manhattan, Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt grew up wealthy. He hunted. He built his own ranch. He believed in capitalism completely, but he'd also seen what happened when money pooled without limits, across generations, compounding, untaxed, unchecked. He called it plainly, a fortune of a certain size stops being money. It becomes power, political power, the kind that doesn't need to win elections to rule. In 1910, Roosevelt stood in a Kansas field, Osawatomie, and said something that would have gotten him canceled by his own party today. He said the biggest fortunes, by sheer size, acquire a different quality than ordinary wealth. They don't just buy things, they buy systems. Roosevelt pushed hard for a permanent inheritance tax. He didn't get it. He left the White House in 1909, and it took a world war to finish what he started. 1916. Europe is burning. The U.S. isn't officially in World War I yet, but everyone can see it coming. Military budgets are exploding. Trade revenue is collapsing. The government needs money fast. And so Congress does something it had done before, taxed death. But this time, they made it permanent. The Revenue Act of 1916 didn't just create a wartime levy. It created a standing, constitutional, structural tax on the transfer of wealth at death. The Supreme Court upheld it in 1921, calling it not a tax on property, but a tax on the privilege of transferring it. That distinction was everything. It meant Congress could raise or lower it, expand or shrink it, and no court would stop them. And raise it they did. By World War II, the top estate tax rate hit 77%. 77%. on the largest estates for 36 consecutive years. Here's the part that breaks people's brains when they first hear it. During those decades, the 1940s, 50s, 60s, even into the 70s, when estate tax rates were at their absolute highest in American history, the American middle class was at its strongest. Income inequality was at its lowest point of the entire 20th century. Social mobility, the actual ability of a kid born poor to end up middle class, was measurably higher than it is today. Now, was that because of the estate tax? Not entirely. Unions were stronger. The GI Bill sent millions to college. Infrastructure investment was massive. But here's what the data keeps suggesting. A society with real limits on dynastic wealth accumulation functions differently than one without them. And the proof isn't abstract. It's a family name you already know. Cornelius Vanderbilt died in 1877 with a fortune roughly equivalent to $25 billion today. He was, at that moment, wealthier than the U.S. Treasury. His family built 137-room mansions through parties that cost more than entire towns earned in a year. And then, generation by generation, the money dissolved. Spending, taxes, bad decisions, family feuds. By the time Gloria Vanderbilt died in 2019, her estate was worth about $1.5 million. Her son, CNN anchor Anderson Cooper, has said publicly he didn't inherit anything significant. He built his own career. He once forged a press pass just to get into Myanmar as a journalist because no door would open for him on his name alone. The Commodore would have been horrified. But here's the thing most people don't know. The Vanderbilt story isn't the tragedy. It's the point. The estate tax was designed to make this happen, to prevent a family from turning a single generation's ingenuity into permanent, compounding, untouchable dynastic power. But then, there's the Rockefellers. And the Rockefellers didn't vanish because John D. Rockefeller saw it coming. He gave away more than half his fortune before he died, created foundations, built trusts, structured everything through legal vehicles designed to survive the tax code. He didn't fight the estate tax. He worked around it. And that's the real story of why the estate tax has never fully delivered on its promise. The tax exists, the rates are real, but the escape hatches are just as real. Dynasty trusts, generation-skipping transfers, charitable foundations that keep family control while avoiding taxes, valuation discounts, irrevocable life insurance trusts. The estate tax has a 40% rate. The effective rate actually paid by the largest estates? Closer to 17%, sometimes less. That gap between the tax that exists on paper and the tax that's actually collected is where most of the real policy debate lives. So here's where we land. The estate tax has survived for over 100 years. It's been called unjust, unconstitutional, un-American, socialist, aristocratic, and necessary, sometimes by the same people in the same decade. But what it actually is a mirror. It reflects what a society believes about wealth, about fairness, about whether the accident of birth should determine the architecture of opportunity. The debate isn't really about tax rates. It never was. It's about a question that's been alive since before the Republic existed. Should a free society allow any family to accumulate so much power that they become, in everything but name, a royal house? Thomas Jefferson said no. Theodore Roosevelt said no. The 77% tax rate said no, loudly, for 36 years. And yet, the largest fortunes today make the Gilded Age look modest. The 3 wealthiest Americans hold more wealth than the bottom 50% of the population combined. The estate tax still exists. The debate still rages. The loopholes still work. And the question, what kind of country does America want to be, remains, as it has always been, unanswered. Drop a comment. Should the estate tax be abolished, or should the loopholes be? Because that's actually 2 completely different questions.